If you're not doing regular problem solving and root cause analysis, you could be headed for disaster. Why is it that we live with anomalies in our operating systems that often lead to more serious failure? If we address these anomalies, it could save us time, money, and a lot of inconvenience. Hello, I'm Harold Robinson, industrial engineer, business consultant, trainer and coach, with a love for root cause analysis and problem solving. How is it that we wait for disaster to happen before we start any form of problem solving or root cause analysis? Most of us will have experienced at least one of these disasters to some degree. And when they're investigated, we often find a number of irregularities that contributed to the failure. These irregularities can be regarded as cracks in the system. And it is these cracks that I want to talk about. Let me give you an example of what happened at a cement factory that I did work for. Stephen Sumati's night shift ended at 6 in the morning, but he agreed to stay on until he got a jammed screw conveyor functioning again. Those of you that have worked with screw conveyors will know that these giant corkscrews can be lethal. Stephen was right in there, loosening the blockage, when somebody switched it on. Stephen was crushed to death. If it was a force of nature or sabotage that caused his death, Stephen's family would probably have known better how to deal with it. But it was neither of those. Something was wrong, but you couldn't point out one thing with any certainty. The investigation revealed quite a few irregularities. Among them were a permit to work hadn't been prepared for the job. The lockout procedure wasn't followed. In fact, calipers, locks and keys that were supposed to be used for it weren't available. There was no proper shift handover meeting where the incoming shift could have been alerted about the work being done on the conveyor. Does this sound familiar? I see these anomalies regularly in different plants. Here's another well-known example. Piper Alpha, the oil rig in the North Sea that exploded in 1988. There were a number of irregularities that led up to that disaster, one being the permit to work system. Watch this video extract.
At the heart of this tragedy, behind the raging fires, the explosions, the collapse of the 20,000-ton rig and the loss of 167 lives, behind the entire catastrophe lies a flawed system of permits to work.
"30 years later, we still have plants where the permit to work systems are dysfunctional. Why do we tolerate these cracks? I'd like to answer that with a simple analogy. Many of you will have heard of the game called Jenga. It's enjoyed by children of all ages and sizes. The game starts with a tower built from wooden tiles that aren't quite square. Each player in turn removes a tile. While he's doing that, he tries not to topple the structure. It's sometimes quite amazing how the tower still stands with so many gaps. Of course, the inevitable happens. One poor soul removes the tile that causes the toppling, and it all collapses in a heap. Let's apply this to our cement plant example. Think of the Jenga tower as a cement plant. Imagine that the gaps are the cracks in the system. Permit to work wasn't prepared. Lockout procedure wasn't followed. Lockout equipment not available. With these cracks, the system worked. Add to that the shift changeover meeting that didn't happen. That was probably the one crack too many that caused the collapse of the system. Like the Jenga tower, with all the gaps still standing, our systems can operate with cracks in them, and this is where we get caught out. When disaster happens, it can be traced back to an accumulation of cracks in the system, like we see in this little formula here. But the accumulation of the cracks doesn't always lead to disaster. Some systems, as we said, can operate for years with the cracks existing in them, like the Jenga tower with the gaps that still stands. Some people would say to me, well, yes, there's always a risk involved when we operate. And I would agree. But what would you regard as acceptable risk? Would you accept a 1 in 10,000 chance of an individual fatality? 1 in 100,000 chance? Try 1 in a million. That's what most of the advanced industrial countries regard as acceptable risk. But how do you calculate the risk of each of the cracks? How do you calculate the accumulation of the risks? I think suffice to say that if we detect the cracks, they indicate enough evidence of risk for us to repair them. Companies that avert disasters strive to investigate and repair cracks before they become disasters. They use those cracks as cues to their root cause analysis and problem-solving efforts. When you investigate the cracks, it is important to use the appropriate technique correctly. Whether you're using 5-why, fishbone diagram, or logic tree. Even more important than the technique used is to actually get people involved in the problem solving. Good teamwork goes a long way to the commitment to the problem solving effort and sustaining it. I hope I've convinced you to start investigating the cracks in your system from tomorrow. Why tomorrow? That disaster could be imminent. To wrap up, disasters don't just suddenly strike out of the blue. They grow out of system cracks that we've learned to live with, and we just don't recognize them anymore. We need to repair those cracks to avert disasters. Problem solving and root cause analysis is a wonderful way to get people to see the cracks and to actually start repairing them. If you can get everyone recognizing and repairing cracks in your business instead of just living with them, you will avoid major disasters. And you'll avoid expense, inconvenience, and reputational damage caused by these. If you'd like more help with making problem solving a way of life in your organization, contact me. Just go to my website on www.haroldrobinson.co.za. Thank you for listening.